spin around our sun create a vibrational voice. As the solar systems move within a galaxy, within the infinite galaxies that move within the whole of physical creation, all weaving a multi-pitched celestial orchestra beyond the comprehension of the human senses. So that word spiritus in Latin was talking about something physical, interesting, but in Aramaic, the word is ruha. Now, ruha is a feminine term. What's the difference between that? It's the difference between masculine, if it was like that in Latin, it would mean that spirit is something that I can look at and hold in my hand, something tangible. But in Jesus' language, in Yeshua's language, ruha is feminine, which means it's not what I'm observing, but rather my feminine awareness or perception of it. Now let's look a little deeper with it. That word ruha in Aramaic means spirit. It means breath. It means heartbeat. It means magnetism. It means electricity. It means electromagnetism. It means cosmic expansion, nuclear forces, wind. Now, every single one of these are examples of frequency and vibration. So what does it really mean to be spiritual? And why do I do all this toning stuff? It's bringing ourselves into the awareness of frequency and vibration. Now, here's the key that I wanted to give you. In Aramaic, being feminine, what's this that I feel on my arm? What is that? What do we call it? Breath, right? Now, in the first century, in that culture, the Semitic culture, Yeshua's culture, they would have had no understanding that the way we think of spirit and breath is two different things. Okay? And what I felt on my arm, to them, that wouldn't be called breath. That's just hot air. Because remember, in Aramaic, ruha is feminine. It's not what I'm perceiving, it's my perception of it. Meaning this, it's not the air that moves through my lungs that meant breath 2,000 years ago, but rather my feminine perception of its movement, or frequency, or oscillation, or vibration. Heartbeat, breath, spirit, car horn. Not necessarily, I don't think they have a word for car horn per se. Chariot horn, I don't know. But it's actually our perception of that's, so what does it mean to be spiritual? It means to be aware of just the most subtle vibration or frequency, movement of air across my skin. To just be open in this room and just be aware of all of the vibrations, whether they be physical, or should I say, whether they be visual, sound, feeling, smell. And just be open for a few moments. So that while the dream that's flying past on our movie screen that we call our life is going through all of its transitions and all of the apparent chaos and suffering that seems to be going on there, realizing that in the words of St. Francis of Assisi, what you are looking for is what is looking. What you are looking for is what is looking. And when you see a reflection, what's reflecting is not what's real, nor is the reflection. What's real is what's looking. And all of it's out in the open right now. It's all being dumped out. Because all of these frequencies that for generations and generations and generations and generations, our ancestors tried not to feel or stifled. My wife is a sacred sensuality model. She's known around the world for it. And it's amazing that if I were to, just as an example, put a photo on social media that shows myself without a shirt on, nobody cares, they don't bat an eye. Now, if it's a woman that does that, there's one particular frequency that culture will hit. It's called shame, pop. And they'll pop the shame frequency, and what happens to anyone who expresses too much? The energy body collapses.
And the suffering.
The suffering. So let me read you a quote before we dive headfirst into the toning. This is from the Magdalene manuscript by Tom Kenyon. Okay? And in this, they talk about the ka, which is in Arabic. Egyptian it was Ka, the energy body. The Theosophists call it the etheric. You mentioned the etheric. The central key in this journey is the strengthening of the Ka, the energy body, through ecstatic states of consciousness. Whether self-generated or created through the ecstasy of sex does not inherently matter. The Ka is nurtured and potentized by ecstatic states regardless of their source. On the contrary, shame is a poison to the Ka body, a toxic element that decreases its vitality and potency. I, an initiate of Isis, find it tragic that the church has shamed women and men around their sexual natures and closed the door on one of the most direct paths to God realization. Whatever you do along this path, my advice is to free yourself of all shame. Search out the catacombs of your own mind and heart. Seek out the dark places in yourself where shame resides and remove it. Find every opportunity to create ecstasy, for it strengthens you and potentizes the Ka. May the obstacles to your flight be few and the blessings along your journey be many. So let's try just a couple of very basic sounds. First sound, I'm not going to really talk about what a lot of these sounds mean in the ancient languages today, but I will tomorrow. First sound we're going to make is a basic sound. It's the first letter of the alphabet, the Semitic alphabet, Aleph. And this is what it sounds like. You got to listen close. It actually doesn't have a sound. In some cases. In other cases, it sounds like this. Just an ah sound. Let's just make that ah sound once. Words that you can say that are going to give you that experience of just making a simple sound. The frequency that sets you free is not necessarily a, is this my phone? The frequency that sets you free is not necessarily a particular tonality. It's whatever frequency lights you up in the moment. I will say this. Toning in a group is far different than toning alone. Toning in a group is so awesome because we naturally come into harmony. We naturally express either in unison or in harmony. And the wild thing is even occasionally, I think of a few years ago, I did tried to record a live toning meditation for a CD I was doing. And I told everybody, the sound of your voice doesn't matter. Okay. And we recorded it. And there was just a couple people, one in particular in the group, that when we listened back to the recording, it was like this. I remember thinking afterward, going, okay, maybe the sound of the voice matters a little, but the thing about it is even though we were listening to I was listening to the recordings afterward, it wasn't something that I thought, okay, and we tried digitally to do all kinds of stuff. Lots of reverb. It just sounded like a cat in a canyon. But the experience itself, as that was happening, even though it seems from the outside in to be some kind of cacophony and nothing seems to be in any kind of harmony, the actual direct experience itself when we were doing it was absolutely incredible. Because I remember people bursting into tears. So the thing that's most important is not what appears to be some kind of effect, but rather how you feel. Now, when you're alone, when you're toning, you can move your tones around and go a little deeper and go a little higher and go loud and go soft and try different sounds, okay? But the thing about being in a group is we're here holistically, and you'll notice yourself always just naturally seeking harmony. And if something feels a little bit off, the beat frequency feels a little bit intense, you'll actually find yourself in training between two people. That's why all of us are here. We're the light workers. We're the ones creating entrainment between all these different people in our culture that appear to be on so far of different sides. Not talking about politics or anything, because there's no polarity there, but but I mean, we're the ones that are creating that entrainment in the center. We're finding that balance and that harmony. So let's go in, and we're going to make that same sound again, the ah sound. And the only thing I'm really I don't know if I'm adding or taking something away, is see if you can get beyond the point of toning, of doing the tone, or sort of performing it, so to speak, and see if you can allow yourself to get to a place where the tone is just coming through. You understand what I'm saying? Just allowing it to express. So what we're going to do is we're going to repeat that ah sound, ah, aleph. We're going to just repeat the sound over and over and over, and rather than counting, when you run out of gas, tone again. When you run out of breath, tone again. You don't have to turn blue and fall on the floor. It's not an endurance test. We're not going to necessarily do these completely together. Just when you run out of the tone, start it over again. We're going to keep it going for a few minutes. And then I'm going to, a few minutes in, I'm going to say, okay, allow it to unravel. And just whatever tone you're on, let that fall away. And then we're just going to be in the room in silence. Okay? Later on tonight, when Hardisa and Rasamai are weaving their magic, and that incredible chant that you end with, and then it's like you're sitting there for 10, 20 minutes just going, like suspended animation. So we're just going to make the ah sound, okay? Just you ready? It's all a very simple sound, easy one to remember. Take a good breath in through your nose. to try a couple other tones. I've got a necklace on in my hair. Little Eye of Ra here. My wife sort of, well, she doesn't right now. She'll often do the Horus sort of hook, the Isis Horus hook with her makeup. Ra is an interesting sound because it was representative of the sun. That's the sun right there, just for metaphorical purposes. So the light of the sun was called Ra. The light of the moon in Aramaic was called Nura. What's unique about moonlight versus sunlight? It's a reflection. But moonlight is sunlight. Now, the sunlight was also, or Ra was also the God light. In Greek, it was called Christos, which people thought was a family name. There was like Jesus Christ and Jimmy Christ and Joey Christ. It means open channel of divinity, if you look in Strong's Greek concordance. This was often called the Christ chakra by the Pneumatics and the Christines, the earliest frequency-based pre-Christians. So that God light was called Ra. Human light is called Nura. Now, if you're watching a sunset, we were just down in Florida. If you're watching a sunset on the Gulf of Mexico, as you can still see the direct light, it's called Ra. When it drops below the horizon, it's called Nura. But it's the same light. The difference is that one's direct and one's reflected. But the reflected light is still the direct light. What we're going to do is we're going to tone two different tonalities here. Ra is the most sacred tone used specifically in ancient Jeeps. Pre-World War II era Jeeps. Ancient Egypt, in the mystery temples, especially in what's called energetic alchemy, which is literally the transmutation of frequencies in the energy body. A lot of people think you need to force these frequencies into shape, but what we really should be doing is exposing ourselves to things like the Pyramiden and Party Son Rasamai and Parangi and John Stringer, and music that just by allowing ourselves to be open in that frequency experience, your energy naturally recalibrates itself. We've been trying to create a perfect life when all we need to do is get the hell out of the way and allow our energy body to open, and it will recalibrate in those experiences. And your brain can't comprehend it. Your brain's not going to be able to form a thought about why it works. Science won't be able to figure it out. Psychology can't touch it with a 1,000-foot pole. Can't get anywhere near it because it's not crystallized. It's frequency or feeling, which is consistently flowing and in movement like water. Okay, it's not a stagnant, static experience. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make the sound like this. We're just going to make that raw sound one time, okay? See how it feels. Just one raw, you take a breath of air. Let's do that raw sound one more time. Let's make the raw sound one more time without actually making the sound. You know how raw feels now. What we're going to do is we're going to put ourselves into the experience of the vibration. Okay? So, in your vision, in your imagination, you're making that tone of raw one more time. But you're not actually going to make the sound. Okay? Silent. So let's do it one time. Get a good breath of air for your silent tone.
more
Even
so.
more so.
I
Yeah.
had a Kundalini activation.
Specifically, Ra was the sound that was drawn up, what was called the central pillar in ancient Egypt. Intriguingly, in Aramaic, it was coded in some of the stories. Let me say this about a lot of the Jesus stories. Joseph Campbell said that we continually mistake mythological archetypes as being references to historical facts. Do you think? There's in two places in the New Testament where it says Jesus was led by the Holy Spirit into the desert. First of all, the word whole, kadash kudsha in Aramaic, means whole, all-encompassing, all-embracing. The word's holos in Greek. It means whole, okay? And the word spirit means more accurately breath or frequency. Yeshua was led into the desert, led by the holy breath, the holy frequency into the desert, which means being aware of your own breath. That is the holy breath, because there is one breath. Are you breathing or are you being breathed? Now, there's something else coded there in Aramaic that's not in any other language, and that's the word desert. Because the word desert in Yeshua's language, it sounds like this, midbar. The midbar. Now, what midbar is in Aramaic, it's an experience where the physical body essentially falls away. You experience the pinnacle of the temple, which is the opening of the energy body, which comes a little later in the story. But as the temple opens, the physical body, your awareness of that falls away, and all that's left is the midbar in Aramaic, or what in Egyptian was called the central pillar. And intriguingly, Yeshua even made reference to Moses, Mises, lifting the serpent up in the midbar, which is him picking up a snake in the desert. Not quite what's going on, raising the serpent through the midbar, and the tone they used to raise it in the midbar was Ra. Sometimes they would do it audibly, sometimes it was done silently. And would lift, would go through the 7 voices of Magdalene. Darkness, desire, ignorance, the exhilaration of death, the foolish words of the flesh, the foolish wisdom of the, or foolish words of the realm, the foolish wisdom of the flesh, and hostility or wrathful wisdom, is what those 7 energy voices look like closed off. So everything you feel that's negative in the world is actually a recessive power. What does that mean? The masculine is like a serpent. The masculine is like an electrical arc. It projects out. The feminine, she nests in upon herself. Negative, positive, negative. What greater way to shut the divine feminine down than to tell people that negative is bad? Drawing in is bad. Nesting frequencies are bad. Magnetism is bad. What's best is clearly defining things, putting religion on paper, making people eat the map and never walk the terrain, having them eat the menu and not get to the meal. Remove the religious experience and just make it concepts on a page. So you make it very masculine, you make it very obvious, this spark that shoots out that's so easy to see. Yet the other half of that equation is actually nullified when you tell someone that an excess of negativity would be someone that draws in too much. It's called depression. You're nesting too much in, you're bringing too much in, and ultimately you break down. I would say there's pretty obvious examples in our culture, especially right now, of people who are over-masculinized, who are so projected, so arc-like that it wants to whip and destroy everything in its path. And what is the primary thing that masculine arc is trying to destroy? It's trying to destroy the feminine. And it talks about all kinds of disgusting, derogatory things about the feminine, because that's what happens when you become over-masculinized. And I'm not using any names. And I'm not going to name any hotels or anything either. So,
Well, your mind is not open, it's not open, it's closed, so you have a certain belief system.
and when your energy body resonates, you're just going to get what's there. You're just going to get what's there. I was actually, I don't know if it was August, I was talking about somebody earlier about how I have a friend that tuned pianos in New York City, and it was like this. It took like several days. You go back over several visits, and it was like, I'd be on the other side of the room like this, and you're like, dong, 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 dong. And then you go through the whole piano, and then you go back over here, and these are out of tune again. And it's like just constantly back and forth. But when it's finally in tune, it's just unbelievable. Now, what I'm saying is, you don't need to tune the piano if you allow yourself to express the frequency that's manifesting through you in this moment, and that doesn't necessarily mean toning. It could be art. It could be music. It could be scooping ice cream. It could be mucking toilets. It really doesn't matter. Whatever is here on the plate for you, chop wood, carry water, whatever is on the plate for you right now, if you do that wholly, fully, and mindfully, that's the frequency that sets you free when you're awake. And that's what we're all here to do, is to be awake, to be mindful. And this is in the midst of powers that have been in power for a long time, resonating frequencies that do the exact opposite, that stunt that keep it from happening, that collapse the energy body down. And I love what James Allen said in As a Man Thinketh, we continually revolt against an effect without, while all the while nourishing its cause in our heart. So let's do some full-on toning we've got about 10 minutes. Let's do some really full-on, wide-open tones. What I'm going to do is, tomorrow we're going to experiment with particular letters and words, and I'm going to show you what they look like. Today I just want to kind of get you into the sounds, forget explaining what all of them mean. But I will do one thing to open this up, and that's the word I'd like to begin with, is a word that, unfortunately, if you go to someone who, probably most, if not almost all, people who would be considered biblical or theological experts or scholars that could have been in the pulpit for 7 decades, they don't have a clue about what I'm about to tell you. And I think it's a little important. The word, we often talk about Lord. That word Lord gets thrown around. Anybody know where the word Lord comes from? I will say it has nothing to do with Jesus or anything 2,000 years ago. Lord. What's that? Master. Anybody know where it comes from?
Nobility? Language owners?
It comes from the 9th century in Old to Middle English in Europe. It comes from the phrase loaf ward. Interesting, because this is going to sound very southern. Lowered. It even has that kind of energy to it. A loaf ward. It was the ruler, which is the one who sets out the parameters for society. They measure out how society must fit within certain parameters. They were called rulers. The loaf ward was the guy at the top of the pyramid. Not like that one. That was called the giver of life, the bread giver. And it was the codependent relationship with all the peons and serfs at the bottom. I don't use the word Lord. Lord would have been so far into the Aramaic mind 2,000 years ago. It's almost an idiotic concept. I'm going to tone the sound, and this is the first tone we're going to make. I'm going to tone it for you once. This is what Lord was in Yeshua's language. So that if someone made the sound Lord, called Yeshua this, or Yeshua would refer to the vast oneness as this, this is the sound that came out of his mouth. This, I think, is just a little bit important, okay? Just feel this out. Feminine, not about a masculine, worldly lord that has power over you. Maybe a little, I will say this, the mar sound in ancient Aramaic, named resh, mar means a bedrock of strength, and the reya, ria, ra, ora, re, raya are all ancient Semitic root sounds that mean an expanding light. Now, ria or reya or ora specifically means an expanding feminine light. So Maria, Lord, was a feminine light expanding from a bedrock of strength. So those that exude that were called lords, and that could be children. That could be, a spiritual master. It could be somebody just open and awake in the moment. That's what we're all here to do, is emanate that light, because it's the only light that there is. So let's what we're going to do is we're going to make the sound Maria. We're going to do it 7 times, but what we're going to do is we're going to make the Maria a sound 4 times, and then we're going to rest in silence for a few moments, and then we're going to do it 3 more times, okay? And then back to silence. So 4, silence,